When he receives the order, a man's hands don't tremble. He simply stares, not at the paper, but at the deep darkness behind it. Outside, you feel the full force of December's wind. The thermometer reads -23, and 3 men still haven't returned from east of Bastogne. 3 men: Eddie Novak, Daniel Webb, Thomas Cross. End of quote. Ray Callahan will hear these names again, but he doesn't yet know when or how. He will learn very soon. The paper in his hand holds a single sentence: fall back. Now, leave them. December 1944. Belgium's Ardennes forest. One of the coldest, darkest, most impossible, and most irreversible corners of the world at that moment. History recorded very little of that night. But what happened was one of the small decisions that determined the fate of World War II. Not the great decisions of great commanders. The small, silent, unseen decision made by a sergeant in a dark forest in 45 seconds. This is the story of that decision and its consequences. The Gray. Inspired by true events, some details have been dramatized. The outcome is history. Ray Callahan came from Harlan County, Tennessee. He had grown up in his father's wooden house on the mountain slopes, the middle of 3 children from a farming family. The thing he did most as a child was get lost in the mountains. He would come down to the town square, wander around for a few hours, then come back in the afternoon. His mother always asked where he'd been. Ray always said the same thing: nowhere. But he was actually going somewhere, to the forests, to the silence, to his deep thoughts. When being human felt difficult, it was easier to take shelter among the trees. He had joined the Army in 1942, at just 22 years old. To those who asked why he joined, he always said the same thing: I felt I had to go. I had to be there. But there was only one person who truly knew why he went. That person was Tommy Cross. Tommy was Ray's neighborhood friend. They had gone to the same school, fished in the same river, loved the same girl at different times. And now Tommy Cross was serving as a communications private in Ray's company. Deep inside the Ardennes forest, at -23 degrees, right in the middle of the German encirclement. Tommy and Ray had gone to the Army on the same day, at Harlan County train station, at 8 in the morning, with his mother's eyes full of red. Tommy had laughed that day. He was someone who laughed at everything. Ray had not laughed at all. They both knew that the man who laughed when he left would always come back. But Ray had misunderstood this. The one who came back wasn't always the one who laughed. The one who came back was sometimes the man who felt nothing, who didn't care. But he didn't yet know these things in December 1944, though he would learn them through the deepest experiences. The 101st Airborne Division arrived at Bastogne in the middle of December 1944. The city was strategically critical because 8 highways connected there. Whoever held Bastogne held the logistical advantage in the Ardennes. The Germans knew this. The Americans knew it too. The problem was that this knowledge was also in the hands of the German commanders, and on December 16th, Hitler's last great offensive began. The operation that would go down in history as the Battle of the Bulge had taken the stage. Approximately 250,000 German soldiers began advancing along an 80-kilometer front. The artillery barrage that began at 4:45 in the morning was so intense that windows rattled in villages on the other side of the Ardennes. Cold and fog neutralized Allied air superiority. The Americans were forced to retreat, company by company, line by line, and Bastogne was left surrounded and defenseless on 3 sides. It's necessary to stop here, because something needs to be understood. The 101st Airborne had come to Bastogne without supplies or logistical preparation. Some soldiers didn't have adequate clothing. Some were short on ammunition. Medical supplies were insufficient. Food was rationed, and the temperature was -23 degrees. To stop, hold on, wait, and fight in these conditions meant finding where the human body and will ended. Ray's company knew these conditions intimately. Company commander, Lieutenant Harris, had converted a small barn into a command post. Inside were a stove that wouldn't burn, 3 hay bales, and walls that shook with every artillery strike. Soldiers took turns on watch. The outside watch period couldn't exceed 45 minutes because beyond that, freezing began in a person. Fingers lost feeling, toes went numb, and thinking became difficult. The body shut down in the cold, first emotions, then thoughts, then judgment. Ray had been living under these conditions for 3 days. 3 days in the same place, the same position, among the same trees. The German line was to the east, maybe 2 kilometers, maybe 3. The distance was vague because fog swallowed everything, snow hid everything. Only sounds came: artillery, engines, occasionally a rifle shot. And with each of those sounds, Ray assessed the company's situation. He could see the line was holding, but he didn't know how much longer it would hold. On the morning of December 18th, before dawn, an intelligence officer came to Harris's command post. His name was Morrison. He was breathless. He had a map, and on that map, a small circle had been drawn. It pointed to a small farmhouse on the road to the village of Longchamp, approximately 4 kilometers to the east. Morrison placed the map on the table and spoke. A German radio station might have been set up in that farmhouse. It wasn't certain, but the clues pointed to it. A local Belgian shepherd had seen German soldiers there 2 days earlier. He had said they were carrying things that looked like antennas. If this was true, German artillery could target Bastogne's defensive positions with precise accuracy. Coordinates would be current. And an artillery attack with current coordinates could collapse the defensive lines within hours. Morrison continued. A reconnaissance group must be sent. It must be identified. Coordinates must be reported. If the station was real, American artillery could eliminate that house. But the group to be sent had to be small, no more than 4 people. More would attract attention. The Germans would be ready. Harris looked at the map. Then he looked at the men in the room. He chose 4 names: Ray Callahan, Eddie Novak, Daniel Webb, Thomas Cross. When you hear these 4 names, something should catch your attention. All 4 from the same company. All 4 knew each other. And among them, Ray and Tommy Cross had known each other since childhood. In war, this was an advantage. Men who trusted each other worked better, but it was also a disadvantage, because men who love each other are also more afraid of losing each other and more prone to making mistakes. No one told Harris this. The mission began at 7 in the morning. 4 men moved through the snow in single file. Ray at the front, Webb and Novak in the middle, Cross at the rear. The sky was still dark and wouldn't brighten for the next few hours. Winter mornings in the Ardennes were like that. The sun didn't rise. The sky stayed gray. It felt like the light was somehow never coming. Snow came up to the knees. Each step was like carrying a weight. Wind blew through the trees, and when it hit the face, it stung like needles. Ray flexed his fingers inside his glove. He could feel them. Good. But he didn't know how much longer he would feel them. The 4 men weren't talking. In war, talking was a luxury. In war, talking meant spending breath. Spending breath meant spending energy. And in this cold, energy was like money. It was saved, not spent, so it could be spent when the time came. Tommy Cross was at the rear. Ray turned to look at him from time to time. Tommy's face was invisible. The hood of his insulated jacket was pulled down. Only his eyes showed, and those eyes were careful, alert, recording every movement. That was Tommy's best quality. He missed nothing. He had grown up in the forests of Harlan County. He knew how to read trees. He knew how to read snow. And he knew very well how to stay silent in forests. After walking for an hour, they approached the farmhouse. Ray stopped. He signaled with his hand. All four crouched. The farmhouse was ahead, about 200 meters. The barn door was open. Gray smoke drifted out from inside. Ray narrowed his eyes. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. But the most important thing was this. The only person who should have been in that farmhouse was not a Belgian farmer. I need to stop you now, because you need to think for a moment to understand what Ray was seeing at that moment. 4 men, 4 kilometers from the German lines, inside a snowstorm, with limited communications, a reconnaissance group waiting without backup. If there were Germans in that farmhouse, there were 2 options. Either they would observe silently and fall back, or they would somehow enter into a confrontation. Both options carried different risks. And both started with the same question. How many people are inside? Ray waited 20 seconds. No movement. Smoke coming from the barn door, but no sound. Then he signaled. Webb and Novak began moving left, around the side of the farm. Ray and Cross would approach from the right. The plan was simple. Approach, observe, determine radio coordinates, get back, don't fight. Because hearing a gunshot could give away the company's position, and in this operation secrecy came before everything, it was more valuable than a weapon. While Webb and Novak moved left, Ray and Cross advanced right. The snow dampened their sounds. Footsteps were inaudible. Ray controlled his breathing, short, light breaths instead of deep ones. Less vapor. Vapor not visible. When they reached the right wall of the farm, Ray stopped. He leaned against the wall. Cross leaned too, a hand's width of distance between them. Ray turned his head. Cross nodded. Everything was in order. Ray slowly looked around the corner, and at that moment he saw something inside. A small metal antenna leaning against the window frame, and beside it, a cable, radio equipment. It was completely clear. The intelligence had been right. End quote. Ray called Harris on his radio. He dropped his voice to a whisper. Confirmed. Radio station present. At least 6 people inside. Coordinates being taken. Harris's voice came from the other end. Get the coordinates and fall back immediately. There's movement around you. The area is not safe and is quite risky. Ray began noting down the coordinates, but just then a sound came from the left. From the direction of Novak and Webb, a single rifle shot. Ray stood up. He signaled Cross with his eyes. The 2 quickly moved toward Novak and Webb's direction. When they rounded the back wall of the farmhouse, they saw 2 German soldiers lay on the snow. One wasn't moving. The other was moaning, slowly. And Novak and Webb were leaning against the back wall of the farmhouse, breathless. Novak's rifle was in his hands, the barrel still smoking. Novak's eyes were full of panic. He whispered. 3 more came out from inside. One was coming toward us. I had to fire. The other 2 ran inside, but they saw us. They'll report now. There was no time left. The Germans were inside, and what they'd do after finding their comrades outside was clear. Ray made his decision in seconds. We're falling back. Now. All 4 turned and ran. Snow was an obstacle, but they had no choice but to run. They plunged into the trees. Sounds came from behind, shouting, German command voices, then fire. Bullets sent snow flying, burned bark off trees. Ray rolled sideways to the ground, got up, ran. Cross was beside him. Novak was visible to the left. Forward, forward, immediately forward. When they entered the forest, the gunfire stopped. In the trees, the range of a German rifle was limited. Ray stopped, breathed, his back against a tree. Deep breath. 1, 2, 3. Then he counted. There were 3. Novak, Webb, Cross. He counted to 4. Counted again. Stopped. There were only 3. Someone was missing. Ray turned. He asked where Webb was. Novak looked away. Cross couldn't speak. They went back into the forest. They whispered Webb's name out loud. Very slowly, very quietly. No answer. They searched for footprints on the snow. The tracks were mixed up. There were prints everywhere from the run. Ray stopped, listened. From the distance, from the direction of the farmhouse, sounds were coming. The German patrol was advancing. He waited 45 seconds. These 45 seconds are hard to describe because no one knows what passed through Ray Callahan's mind in those 45 seconds. We only know the outcome. But you can imagine the weight of those 45 seconds. In the forest, in the snow, at minus 23 degrees, the German patrol approaching, you have two men beside you and you've lost one. Going back might mean your own death. Going back means putting two more men at risk. Going back means not being able to return to the position. And not being able to return to the position means the defensive line weakening. But not going back means something too. Not going back means leaving a man behind. Ray whispered Webb's name one last time. Then he turned. He walked, without looking back. When they returned to Bastogne, Harris was waiting at the command post. The coordinates had already been transmitted. American artillery was preparing to target the farmhouse at that hour. Harris struck Ray on the shoulder and said, "Good work." Ray said nothing. He just sat down. He placed his hands on his knees. He stared, not at anything. He just stared. Novak went outside the command post. Cross went outside too. Ray was left alone inside. He sat like that for a few minutes. Then Harris asked, "Where's Webb?" Ray didn't answer. Harris asked again. Ray raised his head. He looked into Harris's eyes. He said one sentence. He stayed behind. Then he lowered his head again. Harris marked Webb as missing in his report that night. Missing. Not dead, not wounded. Missing. War's most uncertain and most troubling category. What would his family feel when they got the letter? Your son is missing, meaning either he died or he's alive, but we don't know where he is. This uncertainty was sometimes heavier than a death notice. That night, Ray didn't sleep. He sat in the company's position until morning. He clasped his hands together. He closed his eyes. But Webb's face didn't come to mind. What came was something different. What came was those 45 seconds. Those 45 seconds he'd waited in the forest. In that time, he could have gone back. And he hadn't. Going back might have killed him too. Might have put the entire group at risk. Maybe nothing would have changed. Or maybe Webb was still out there and all he needed was one man. Just one man. He kept blaming himself. Ray Callahan would never know the answers to these questions. I want to stop you for a moment now, because I want to ask this. What would you have done in those 45 seconds? One of your team is missing. The German patrol is coming. Going back might mean your own death. The defensive line is waiting for you, and there's a man in the forest, maybe alive, maybe not. What would you have done? There is no right answer to this question. Or maybe there is, but no one can say it out loud. On the morning of December 19th, a major German artillery attack began on Bastogne's eastern line. But, contrary to expectations, that attack was scattered and inaccurate. The coordinates were wrong. Why? Because Ray's group had disabled the radio station. The German radio equipment was gone. Artillery coordinates were based on old data, and that data was wrong. American positions were largely undamaged. Those positions held. That line was protected. Historians never wrote this small detail, but that's what happened. The same day, German General Lutwitz sent a formal surrender offer to the 101st Airborne. The letter was short and clear. Bastogne was surrounded. Resistance was meaningless. If they surrendered, they would receive honorable treatment. General McAuliffe read the letter. He turned to his officers. He said something. That something was a single word. Nuts. Nonsense. D. This answer went down in history. But those pages only recorded the great decisions of great men. They didn't reflect the small, dark, shameful decisions of sergeants like Ray Callahan. December 20th, the 5th day of the Bastogne siege. Supply lines were still cut. Food continued to dwindle. Ammunition was approaching a critical point. And since the weather was still cloudy and foggy, Allied aircraft couldn't bring aid. Soldiers were freezing. Some were shivering, even inside their sleeping bags. Some were burning tree bark, thinking maybe it would help to warm themselves. Some were dozing off on watch and falling sometimes meant dying from freezing. Ray couldn't distinguish these days from one another. Every day was the same. Watch, waiting, cold, sound, artillery, silence, waiting, watch. And every day in an endless loop, Webb's name somewhere. He was asking Harris, was there any communication? Is he on the wounded list? Was he asked about at the prisoner camps? Harris shook his head each time. No, no, no. On December 21st, Tommy Cross came to Ray. The two shared coffee. It wasn't really coffee. It was a mixture of warm water and coffee powder, but in war definitions stretched too. Tommy laughed. He said something. Ray couldn't remember exactly what he said, but Tommy was laughing, and that laugh recalled the mountains of Harlan County, those sunny mornings, the sound of the river, his mother's kitchen smell, and the longing for it. This was his last conversation with Tommy. On the morning of December 22nd, a German artillery attack began on the northern section of Bastogne. The attack lasted 20 minutes. At the end of 20 minutes, 4 men from inside the company had lost their lives. Tommy Cross was among those 4 men. Harris gave Ray the news in the afternoon, with a short sentence. Cross died today. Ray said nothing. He turned. He left. He went to the farthest rear position of the company. He sat down. He sat for a long time. He didn't close his eyes. He just stared into the distance, into nothingness. And at this point, I want to ask you, why is Tommy Cross in this story? Why did he die without entering combat? Why did he exit the scene, nameless, from just an artillery attack? Because war is like that. In war, not everyone has a moment. Some die while sleeping in their positions. Some die while drinking their coffee. Some die smiling. And those deaths don't go down in history. They just remain as a list number inside a file. Tommy Cross became list number 1,247 among the 101st Airborne casualties. End quote. In the afternoon of December 22nd, Novak came to Ray. His eyes were swollen. He was pale-faced. He sat beside him and spoke. Ray wasn't expecting what Novak told him. Novak was describing that day, that moment of running. He was describing what he'd seen when Webb fell. Webb's right ankle had twisted. He had fallen into the snow. Novak had turned back. He had tried to help, but the Germans had gotten too close, and Novak had been forced to leave him. But I left him, Ray, Novak said. Not you. Me. I saw him, and I left. You hadn't even seen him. Ray looked at Novak. He looked for a long time. Then he said a single word. Go sleep. Novak didn't leave. Ray, go sleep, Eddie. This time Novak left. That night Ray cried for the first time, at the farthest rear position of the company, unseen by anyone, behind a wooden partition. It was brief. In war, crying was a luxury. But those few minutes happened. Then it was over. And Ray never cried again. At least, not in Bastogne. December 24th, Christmas Eve, the 9th day of the Bastogne siege. That morning, a miracle occurred. The skies cleared. For the first time in days, the sky was visible, and in that sky, Allied aircraft appeared. C-47 transport planes passed over Bastogne, dropping supply packages, ammunition, food, medical supplies. This are BAST, for C, bandages. Soldiers came outside. They knelt down. They watched the packages. Some cried. Some laughed. Some just stared. Ray stared too. He showed no emotion, but something relaxed inside him. Bastogne was holding. They were still standing, but Webb still wasn't there. Where was Webb? December 25th, Christmas Day, 4:30 in the morning. The sentry on the outer perimeter heard a sound coming from the forest. He called out, "Stop! Who goes there?" The reply came in English. Weak, trembling, in broken words, "I'm American. Don't shoot." The sentry shone his flashlight. The man was crawling through the snow. His right foot was twisted, and he was trying not to step on it. His face was frozen. His lips were blue, purple. He wore American military clothing, but it was soaked, torn. His hair and beard were tangled together. It was Daniel Webb. Webb had survived that night and the following 6 days among the German lines. He had hidden in a barn. An elderly Belgian couple had found him and taken him in. They had given him bread. They had given him water. During the daytime, they had hidden him under an old wooden chest because the Germans checked that barn twice a day. And Webb had waited under the chest, holding his breath, hearing the sound of German boots for 6 days. End quote. On Christmas Eve, he had noticed the German patrols thinning. By chance, Patton's Third Army was approaching from the south, and the Germans had begun getting squeezed on 2 fronts. Patrols had diminished. Webb had gotten out of the barn. He had begun walking. His ankle was sprained. Each step hurt more and more. But he walked toward Bastogne, through the snow, slowly. The doctor examined Webb. 2 fingers on his right hand were frostbitten. They had to be amputated. Webb moaned with pain, then fell silent. He closed his eyes. Ray asked the doctor, "Can he talk?" "Doctor, a little, but he's tired." Ray went inside. Webb was lying down. His eyes were open. Ray pulled the chair. He sat beside him. The two didn't speak. They didn't speak for a long time. Outside there was artillery sound. Patton's army was approaching, but inside there was silence. Then Webb spoke. His voice was hoarse, broken. "You didn't come back." This wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even an observation. It was just an observation, a confirmation of a fact. "Ray, no, Webb, you did the right thing." Ray said nothing. Webb continued, "If you'd come back, you wouldn't have found me. I was in the dark. I was hiding, but you would have gotten lost too. The line wouldn't have held, and we would have lost." Ray still wasn't speaking. "Webb, this doesn't comfort you, I know." "Ray, no. Webb, it doesn't comfort me either, but that's how it is." A long silence passed. Artillery sounds came from outside. They were getting lower. Patton was approaching. Ray got up. He walked to the door. He turned. "Novak was forced to leave you behind," he said. "I want to have him talk to you." Webb closed his eyes. "Okay." On December 26th, at 4 in the afternoon, advance units from General Patton's Third Army reached Bastogne. The siege had been broken. Soldiers came outside. They shook hands in the city streets. And they embraced. They shouted. Bastogne had held. The 10-day siege had finally come to an end. And now I want to ask you, do you think history said it was done right? Did Ray Callahan do the right thing in those 45 seconds? Following orders, falling back, leaving Webb? Was it right? Or was going back, maybe dying, but at least trying, the right thing? And what does it tell you that the man who asked himself this question, 40 years later, approaching the end of his life, wrote a single sentence on a single piece of paper? History's books would write, "The 101st Airborne defended Bastogne. McAuliffe said nuts. Patton arrived. Victory was the Allies." But those books didn't write this. A sergeant named Ray Callahan, on the night of December 19th, waited 45 seconds in a forest and didn't turn back. And when he returned, one of 3 men died. One spent 6 days on the German lines and came back walking, and that position held. And the line didn't break. Eddie Novak returned to Ohio after the war. He worked in a factory in Dayton. He got married. He had 2 children. He never talked about the war. Only once, in 1979, his oldest son asked him, "Dad, were you scared in the war?" Novak thought. Then he said, "Yes, I was scared every day. But the real fear came after the war was over." He died in 1987, 67 years old. Daniel Webb returned to Tennessee. He was missing 2 fingers, but the remaining 8 worked. He bought a small house on the shore of a lake near a town north of Bastogne. He became a fisherman. Neighbors occasionally asked Webb, "How many fish do you catch in this lake?" Webb would laugh and answer, "Enough." He died in 1998, 74 years old. He was always remembered in that village as the fisherman without fingers. Thomas Cross, unfortunately, never made it home. On December 22, 1944, north of Bastogne, he lost his life in a German artillery attack. The news reached Harlan County in January. His mother read the letter. Then she went to the kitchen. She made coffee. She sat in front of the window. She sat there all day, looking out, lost in thought. Ray Callahan returned to Tennessee, to Harlan County, to his father's wooden house. He lived there for 40 years. He got married. He had 3 children. He tended his garden. He talked with neighbors. He went to church on Sundays. He never told anyone anything. The Harlan County newspaper once wanted to feature local war veterans in a story. Ray didn't open the door. He sent a written note to the newspaper. It read, "I don't participate in these kinds of things." He died in 1991, 71 years old. The funeral was small, family and a few neighbors. Words were spoken at the cemetery, prayers were read, a simple ceremony. When his children opened his chest at home, they found a few things inside: a medal from the war, a few photographs, and at the bottom, wrapped in an old plastic bag, a yellowed piece of paper. The children opened it, they read it, and they closed it again. On it was written a single sentence: "The 19th of December, 1944. I didn't go back. And I don't know." This story ends at this point, but there's nothing that has to end here, because no one knows why Ray Callahan wrote that paper. No one knows why he kept it. What did that sentence, waiting inside that bag for 40 years, mean? Was it a confession, an apology, or was it simply an observation? Was it a man's need, before dying, to record the heaviest moment of his life somewhere? And do you know the answers to these questions? The 101st Airborne Division suffered more than 1,600 casualties in the defense of Bastogne. The German Ardennes offensive began on the 16th of December, 1944, and ended on the 25th of January, 1945. It was the last major German offensive on the Western Front of World War II, and it was stopped. Bastogne held, not with great plans, not with great decisions, with small decisions, in dark forests, in 45-second waits. If after hearing this story, you can't get something out of your mind, right below, what would you have done? Would you have gone back? What would you have felt in those 45 seconds? If this story found you somewhere inside, the next one hits harder. The link is below. Stay with us. The Gray. Every story is true until it isn't. When you first heard this story, perhaps you thought, "I already know Bastogne. I watched Band of Brothers. I read the history. I know McAuliffe's nuts answer. I know Patton's arrival." So what's new in this story? What's new is this. Inside every piece of history, there are small decisions that were never recorded, never made it into archives, never appeared in any book. Like a sergeant's 45-second wait, like the metal antenna a radio officer saw, like a soldier's 6-day hiding that frostbit 2 of his fingers. History's pages don't record these small decisions, because when you see the big picture, small details become blurry. But without those details, there would be no big picture. The Battle of Bastogne was real. The 101st Airborne holding that line was real. McAuliffe's nuts answer was real. Patton's late but arriving help was real. These don't change. But Ray Callahan, Eddie Novak, Daniel Webb, and Tommy Cross are fiction, not real men. However, the decisions they made happened thousands of times in that war. Thousands of sergeants made similar decisions. Thousands of men waited in the forest and went back, or didn't, and the vast majority of those decisions were never written down. That's why the Gray tells this story, because what was never written is sometimes more real than what was. Let's return now to the real data of the Battle of the Ardennes, because that real data is necessary to understand how heavily burdened the air was that men like Ray Callahan breathed. On the morning of the 16th of December 1944, German artillery fired the opening salvo of the offensive with 5 hours of uninterrupted bombardment. The target was the weakest point of the Allied lines, the Ardennes front. This region was considered a relatively quiet area. Tired divisions were sent here to rest. Inexperienced units were given practice here. The Germans had chosen exactly this. The attack would advance on 3 axes. On the northern axis were SS armored units. On the central axis, infantry divisions. On the southern axis, more armored support. The objective was to cross the Ardennes, reach the port of Antwerp, and cut Allied logistics lines. Hitler called this Wacht am Rhein, meaning Guardians of the Rhine. Later generations would call it the Battle of the Bulge, because on the map, the German advance looked like a protrusion, a bulging. Bastogne was right at the center of this protrusion. 8 roads intersected there. Whoever held it could disrupt German logistics, or if the Germans took it, Allied logistics would collapse. That's why Bastogne was indispensable to both sides, a fortress. The 101st Airborne was brought here by truck from Reims. The truck journey lasted dozens of hours, in the cold, in open beds. Soldiers froze. They tired. They were exhausted. And when they got off, they went directly to defensive positions. Supplies were insufficient. Clothing was insufficient. Some soldiers had no snow boots. Frostbite, from the very first day, was a significant part of frontline casualties. Not by fighting. You died by freezing. And this was a much quieter, much lonelier death. Ray learned this reality in 3 days. The sentry on the left couldn't be found on the second morning. A search was conducted. They found him 10 meters behind his position, lying in the snow. He had fallen asleep. Sleep and freezing were sometimes the same thing. When body temperature dropped, consciousness closed. And when consciousness closed, a silent sleep began. When sleep began, the body cooled further. And beyond a certain point, you just didn't wake up anymore. They saved that sentry. He survived, but he also lost 3 fingers on his right hand, amputated. In the surgical tent, when the doctor cut his hand, the soldier screamed, then fell silent, then cried. Ray heard that sound. And after that sound, for the rest of his life, every time he felt himself going cold, he would hear that sound. In these conditions, what did it mean for Ray Callahan to enter the forest on the morning of December 18th? It wasn't just a reconnaissance mission. It was the risk of freezing in the forest. It was the risk of encountering a German patrol in the forest. It was the risk of not being able to get help if wounded in the forest. It was the risk of getting lost in the forest. It was the risk of losing everything in the forest. Ray knew this. Novak knew it. Webb knew it. Cross knew it. And they went anyway. You don't need to have lived through that era to understand this. What's enough to understand that era? Those men weren't making a choice. The choice had already been made for them. They had no option. The order had come. No questions. No arguments. You just walked. You just moved forward. And whatever your inner voice said, your feet were moving into the forest. The days spent in Bastogne changed something inside Ray. He didn't notice this change at the time. But years later, in the mountains of Tennessee, while working in his garden, he would stop from time to time. His hands would stop for a moment. His gaze would drift into the distance. And to those who asked where he was looking, he said nothing. He couldn't say anything. Because there was nothing to say. 45 seconds can be the most important moment of a human life. But it's never possible to explain that moment in words. Because words can't carry that weight. Those 45 seconds remain somewhere outside the limits of language. Did Novak understand this? Perhaps. Shortly before he died, in 1987, in a hospital room, he said something to his oldest son. His son told it afterward. My father said this to me. Once I was forced to leave a man behind. I left him because I had no other choice, but leaving him there never left me. And that's normal. Some things aren't meant to be left behind. Did Webb understand? Perhaps. In his house by the lake shore, in the evenings, while dangling his fishing line in the water, leaning his two-fingered hand on the boat's railing, no one knows what he was thinking. We only know this. Webb never spoke of Bastogne, but he loved the lake. He spent hours there. Maybe the water reminded him of something. Maybe the water made him forget something. Did Ray understand? Yes. That piece of paper says so. That piece of paper carries 40 years of understanding. And the single sentence on it says, I know what I did. But I don't know if it was right or wrong. That might be the most honest sentence a person can say to themselves. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on the 25th of January 1945. The German army had suffered approximately 80,000 casualties. The Americans had also suffered approximately 80,000 casualties. The German offensive had failed, and Hitler's last great move had gone down in history. An irreversible balance had been established on the Western Front. In April 1945, Berlin would fall. In May, the war would end. But for some men, the war didn't end. It didn't end for Ray Callahan. It didn't end for Eddie Novak. It didn't end for Daniel Webb. For them, the war continued in the mountains of Tennessee. It continued in an Ohio factory. It continued on the lake shore. And today, as you listen to this story, that war is still continuing in a piece of paper, inside a chest, in a single sentence. The 19th of December, 1944. I didn't go back. And I don't know